actually some past attractions. You can see what else is coming on the PRI events page. And since we are in the virtual pub, I will go ahead and pour myself a beer. Tonight's beer is a Fiddlehead, delicious.
All right, Don, you are the host now,
Okay, thank you.
and we're live.
We are live on YouTube. That is actually the slide for our last session a couple of weeks ago, but you can catch the recording on our YouTube channel. And we also, that happened since the last session. That was at the State Science Teachers Conference, which many of our attendees tend to be science teachers. And we did this last night, and it is also on our YouTube channel. And that link takes you to, that might not actually get you where you need to go to see the recording. And here is tonight's session: Resilience Hubs in New York, Pathways to Community-Led Multi-Hazard Resilience. 2 weeks from tonight is, of course, Thanksgiving, so we will not have a session then. So our last session for the fall will be on the Blaschka glass invertebrates with Stephen Koob from the Corning Glass Museum. And, you can donate there, and you can subscribe to our newsletter, which I thought I had a QR code on that, but I don't, but I can put that in the chat in a little bit, and that will get you to what's coming up. Did my slideshow stop? It's not supposed to stop. So as people have been joining, I'll again say that say welcome to Science in the Virtual Pub, and I'm Don Haas from the Paleontological Research Institution, and we will formally get started in just a few minutes. We'll let people filter in for a little while, and you can see some coming attractions and some recent sessions as well. And our online sessions are almost always recorded, and the recording can be found on the under the live tab on our YouTube channel, which you can either search out or just go to priweb.org/YouTube. That was our session 3 weeks ago. And again, the recording is up on the YouTube channel. And this we did at the State Science Teachers Conference the weekend before last. And this was last night. And again, the recording is on the YouTube channel. And here is tonight's session: Science in the Virtual Pub, Resilience Hubs in New York, Pathways to Community-Led Multi-Hazard Resilience, with Alistair and Rebecca. And we won't have a session on Thanksgiving, so our last session of the fall will be the conservation of Blaschka glass models, treatment of complex construction materials, and that relates to our new-ish exhibit at the Museum of the Earth of the Cornell Blaschka glass invertebrates collection. Very, very cool 150-year-old glass models of invertebrates. And there's the newsletter for our educator newsletter. And we'll probably let the slides roll through up until we get to tonight's slide, and then we'll hand it over to Rebecca and Alistair. And that is our exhibit open through the end of the year on the rocks and fossils of upstate New York. And we are the Paleontological Research Institution in Ithaca, New York. And it is 7:05, so I'm not going to let it roll through again. I'll just stop sharing and pass it off to Alistair and Rebecca. So take it away.
All right. Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to see so many folks here. Thank you for joining us. My name's Alistair Hayden. I'm an assistant professor of practice at Cornell's Department of Public and Ecosystem Health in the College of Veterinary Medicine. And I'm joined today by my wonderful colleague, Rebecca. I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rebecca Morgan-Sternbrenner. I'm a senior lecturer in the Brooks School of Public Policy at Cornell University, and I'm really happy to be here today and excited for this conversation.
I need to share my slides, but Rebecca and I have been working on some projects around disaster resilience, centering communities across New York State. And that is what we'd like to share with you today. So I'm going to advance the slides and over to you, Rebecca.
Well, thank you so much. So today we are here and we're going to talk to you about resilience hubs, which are really a great new pathway of investing in community-based problem solving for the future that we have in front of us and the challenges that we're facing. And so we wanted to start off with introducing really who we are. And last year, so Alistair and I were at different schools, both at Cornell University, but we study what are disasters, what makes communities vulnerable, how we can build communities to be more resilient to what's coming, and really trying to understand what communities are facing. And so one of the partnerships we had about 9 months ago, we started this process, I would say, Alistair, right? And we worked with the Federation of American Scientists and looked at heat. And we were looking at heat waves in 2 different ways. And you can see, like, here are 2 publications that came out of it that were action-based policy setting to understand really what the problem is, very targeted what's being faced. And you could see Alistair led this paper on defining disaster, incorporating heat waves and smoke waves into disaster policy, and along with a whole team, and I with a whole team led this conversation on comprehensive strategies to address extreme heats in schools from a federal level. And so one thing that we were trying to do in our partnership with the Federation of American Scientists is really understand what are the challenges that we're facing and how we can really dig into understand and connect the science with the policy so we can make informed decision making and empower communities to have a more resilient future. And while we were doing this, we understood one pathway we can do that is really building resilience hubs. And why resilience hubs? And so historically, we've had a whole bunch of disasters that have come out that we face in our environmental systems. And what we want to do is look at solutions for community-based facilities. And what resilience hubs are amazing at is that they're intended to be co-developed and co-designed with community partners. And so instead of a very well-meaning state, federal, or local agency saying, if we're going to evacuate, we're going to evacuate to this location, and this is how we're going to deal with a disaster. Instead, the community-based facility is brought up into the conversation earlier, and resilience hubs lets that community-based facility work to identify what they need to invest in to build resilience, how they can invest in their adaptive capacity to disasters, and what they could do to reduce resilience. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the science behind that and what's changing in our environment. And then I'm going to help define these words that vulnerability, resilience, and adaptive capacity, because they actually mean something very, very specific. And understanding those is going to help you see why Alistair and I think that investing in in pathways to build resilience hubs is really important. And one thing about our project that's really, really important is that what we want to do is build this knowledge collaboratively and make a replicable model. And so ultimately what we want to do is empower all community organizations in New York State to be able to build themselves as a resilient hub. And that's our ultimate goal. So first, why do we need to help communities invest in resilience hubs? So the first question I have here, and if you have in the chat, I really encourage you to put in the chat, when you think about your community's biggest natural hazard threat, what is it? What is the thing that you think about when you're thinking, I want to invest in my own, in what disaster is affecting my home, my community, my region? Is it flooding, extreme heat, extreme cold, drought, severe storms, hurricanes, typhoons, blizzards, wildfire, tornadoes, landslide, volcanic activity, and more and more and more. So if you would like to participate and put in the chat, I encourage you to do so. You can even just think in your own mind. I see people, blizzards, flooding and cold. The rest are coming out except volcanoes, hurricanes. I see, thank you, hurricanes, flooding, all sorts of different things that are coming out. And one of the things that we think about when we think about a community's hazards and what that community is facing is we often look retroactively where we say, well, I remember experiencing a flood in my community, and so I'm gonna want to dig in and prepare for that flood. And that's a very smart thing to do, and I encourage you to keep doing that. But we're going to talk about how our climate systems are shifting, and drought's a very big one, and definitely spreading in new places. But what we're starting to see is that our climate systems are shifting. And so when we think about what our community's biggest natural hazard threat is, there are definitely ones that have happened in the past, but we want to think about what investing in what's coming in the future. If you can advance, that would be great, Alistair. And so what this is a very exciting map of the US, and this is all the different basically hazards or disasters that happened in 2023 that cost over $1 billion in weather-related events. So this doesn't mean that this is all the disasters that happened, but these were ones that cost $1 billion in recovery. And so what this means, and if we look over time, you can go to that web link and see that NOAA puts this out. You can look pretty way back and you can see that those are shifting. Thank you, Becky. Flooding and severe storms, absolutely. Those are as well coming up. You can keep bringing up disasters. But you can see how many disasters that are costing billions of dollars in the US. And one of the things we want to do, and in order to build resilience, is to look at these and see what we can do there is that we can understand what's going on. And so we can see from here what you said is really, really important about what these different $1 billion disasters are. And so we can see that there were wildfires in Hawaii over there. There were definitely flooding, and you could see flooding out west in California, in the Northeast, in Florida. You can see severe weather all over the middle of the United States. We have drought and heat waves by Texas, and all these different climate events that are happening that are costing billions of dollars. And you can move forward if you don't mind. And what this looks like since 1980 is that we are spending a lot more money every year on disasters events. And part of this is because we're having an increase in disasters. So if we look at a lot of them are happening between July and December when we see this surge. You can see that all these different events are coming up, and in particular in 2017 had a big spike, as did as did 2005, but what we're seeing is the trend is that they're increasing, and that increasing in billions of dollars is affecting all the different spending on local, regional, state, and federal areas. But what we see is an increase in events. You can move forward. And what this data shows us here, again, is the different types of events that we're seeing. And you can see that in 1980, the number of events that cost in the billions was pretty low. But between, you can see all the way to the right there, you could see spikes of events, and we're starting to see winter storms are in the purple. A majority of severe storms, that's in the green, that's that big bar, and often leads to blue, which is flooding. And you could see in 2023, we had a big spike in the amount of flooding that arose. But you can see through multiple perspectives that we're having an increase in billion-dollar disaster events, and that affects different communities differently. This isn't always federal money. Often this affects local, state, regional areas. Even if there's federal involvement, this affects people tremendously in how they move forward, and it's affecting different people's lives. You can move forward again. And so what we're going to see here is this is temperature in the US. This is temperature throughout the world, I'm sorry. And each one of those different blue dots is over a different country. And in the center, you can see the year. So the year right now is 1877, 1883, 84, 85. And you can see that it's a little bit cold. So the blue is a little cold and the red is a little bit warm. And so we can see 1905, 1906, 1907, 1910, 12, 13. It's still running a little bit cold, a little bit warm. But you can definitely see the trends of where things are going, relatively swinging back and forth. 1930s, you can see things getting a little bit warmer and a little bit colder. And here we're coming into the 40s. 50s. I'll say that this data comes out of the Berkeley Earth Lab and has been collecting this data, and it's looking from 1850 to 2020. So now we're moving into the 1970s, and you can see it's still pretty regular shifts. So it's shifting a little bit warm and a little bit hotter, but now we're starting to move into the mid 90s, and you can see the yellow and the red is starting to pick up. And what the yellow is 1 degree Celsius above. Orange is 2 degrees, and the dark red is 3 degrees Celsius, 5.4 degrees Fahrenheit above the norm. Here's 2018, 2019, 2020. And you can see definitely that across the world and across the globe, and we've only seen this get bigger and bigger as we move along. And so one thing that we know is that we are moving, disasters are costing more money, we're having more disasters, and our temperature is rising. And we could see this globally because these are all different countries throughout the world. And so with that knowledge, we know what we need to do, which is understand that we're gonna move forward. You can move to the next one. And so in July 22nd, 2024 was Earth's hottest day on record. So the data we just showed you was to the year 2020, and by 2024 you can see the average temperatures in white there, and then the last 3 years that was outside of that map, we are beating those temperatures significantly. And so what does this say? That the Earth is getting warmer. We know climate change is happening, and we know that that heat is increasing. And so we know that between July 21st and 23rd in 2024, it exceeded the previous year, which was the hottest day on record before that. And so we see this trend moving forward. You can advance to the next slide. But what does this all mean for leaders and decision makers? This is really only a fraction of the science, because what this means is that there's shifts happening all over the world. I'm just talking to you about temperature, but we know that our whole climate system is this beautiful integrated orchestra of different events. And while one while temperature is one indicator, we can also see that that means that that is affecting all these other shifts and systems around the world, and we're seeing shifting all over. And so what it means is that we're having unexpected temperature and weather. There's an increase in intensity of disasters, and that's really what's happening, is that where before we would have had disasters that were at a certain level, when we see these extremes happening, the intensity of each disaster event is getting more and more. More people are being impacted. The availability of resources to manage disasters is being used up, because every time you have one of these extreme events, like we see in the flooding in Asheville, Carolina, or any other location of events, then often local, state, and federal reserves are being used up. And so there are huge economic impacts to different people who are trying to get back into their home, or losing work, or and often lives. So what else? What else does this mean for leaders as we move forward? You can advance to the next slide. Well, it means that we need to understand how this is really affecting people. And so there are three terms that I started with: resilience, vulnerability, and exposure. And these are the three different pieces that the International Panel on Climate Change, which is meeting right now, and really thinking about what's happening when we talk about resilience. What does this really mean? Well, resilience is a term that gets used very often, but what the current definition that we use is that this is the capacity for social, economic, and ecosystems to cope with the hazardous event, a trend, or a disturbance, like I just showed you, responding in reorganized ways that they can maintain their essential function, identity, structure, as well as by biodiversity in the case of ecosystems, and maintain their capacity for adaptation, learning, and transformation. It's a whole lot buried into that, what resilience really means. And so because we're studying resilience hubs, it's really comes down to, it's the capacity, and this is why I bolded it, it's the capacity to cope and maintain function, and the capacity for adaptation and learning. And so that communities, both human, environmental, and ecosystem communities, can move forward. We also use the term vulnerability, which is the propensity or predisposition to be adversely affected, and encompass a variety of concepts, elements, including sensitivity or susceptibility to harm, or lack of their capacity to cope and adapt. So what makes communities vulnerable to disasters is that they're adversely affected, including their susceptibility and their to harm, and it's how much they have a capacity to cope and adapt. And often we see vulnerability happen if there isn't socioeconomic conditions that allow people to evacuate from their homes and move to a hotel. You can be vulnerable in your physiological location, meaning that your home may be in a location that never flooded before, but now because of shifting climate systems is now flooding, or we didn't have heat waves before, but now we're getting to extreme heat. And like we can see in upstate New York, a lot of people do not have air conditioning, but we have had all this heat happening, and that's becoming really stressful for people with sensitive systems. And then there's a term, exposure, which is the presence of people, livelihood, species, or ecosystems, environmental function, services, and resources, infrastructure, or economic, social, or cultural assets in places and settings that can be adversely affected. And basically what that comes out to is that it's the presence of anything in a place that could be adversely affected by extremes in the environment that we're starting to see more and more of, kind of like I showed you with just temperature. And so again, resilience is that capacity to cope. Vulnerability is the propensity to be adversely affected, and that lack of capacity of cope. And the exposure then is the presence of anything in a place that could be adversely affected. You can move forward. I hope that was clear. And so when we think about really how different communities are affected, I like to show this gears because they really interact with each other. So I just explained this very academic and science-based definition that the IPCC is using to make these global assessments. But really what it comes down to is that these two, exposure and vulnerability, are gears that feed into each other. And this comes from the World Risk Index. And you can see that vulnerability is made up of three little gears: susceptibility, the ability to cope, and the ability to adapt to their environment. Meaning, if I know that a flood is coming, do I have money to be able to go to a hotel? Right? That's a very, very simple way to adapt. Or do I have access to a car that I can go get sandbags? Or can I go and evacuate to someone's home? And then that is being propelled from the social sphere to the natural hazard sphere of exposure, to sea level rise, floods, earthquakes, droughts, and cyclones, and the exposure to those natural systems. And so if we are seeing an increase, and I just showed you just heat alone, but there are so many of our different environmental systems that are shifting, like sea level rise and flooding in addition to heat. And that exposure is turning the gear and also forcing in the societal sphere that vulnerability to change. And so what do we do with this information? Alistair, you can move to the next one. We think about how this works as far as social protection and environmental management. And so what we have here now is you could see that explosion in the right there that's the natural an acute event, right? And that's what's happening. So boom, there's a flood or a storm system or an earthquake or whatever you have. We look at different environmental disasters, and they can be lots of things. But let's say this is extreme heat or a flood. That seemed to be what people put in the chat as well. Right after that response is we have emergency relief. So that's when everybody comes in. We've had a flood. We're pulling people out of their house. We're ripping out carpets. We're doing all those things to save as many people's lives as we can and get people safe. And then we move to reconstruction, which is what is the bare minimum we can do to get people back into their homes and back into places. And that's where we're starting to see vulnerability play a place, because it's been, I think, about 6 weeks and people in Asheville still aren't back in their homes. And in fact, from Hurricane Katrina, there's still people who aren't back in their homes. And that was way back in 2009. But when we see that, so we have emergency relief, we have reconstruction, and then we move up into this green area where we're starting to invest back into reducing vulnerability. And so we're looking into the risk analysis and understanding what are the gaps in our systems. And then we start to build into preparedness. How can we adapt our current systems and strengthen them through social protections for disaster situations, and then move into getting back into early warning systems. Now, before we move forward, I'll say that typically what happens, we have a natural extreme event, and you could see this with a lot of events. We rebuild, and then we've spent a lot of our money and time and energy and have to move back on to different things. And so when we're going to talk about resilience hubs, it's really planning through all these different stages of a disaster. It's not just that disaster, it's not just that response, but it's the before, during, and after, and the planning and thinking about the social protection of disaster management as being this perpetual cycle that we need to invest in, not just the early warning and be able to move on, but people kind of want to forget and move on that it happened, but these different disasters move forward. You can move forward. I'm trying to move it along so we have a lot of different slides. And so I think I'm going to pass these off to Alistair. Is this your turn?
Yep.
To speak? I'm going to take a break and put myself on mute and let Alistair take over for a little bit.
So thank you so much, Rebecca, for the awesome introduction to why community-centered disaster resilience is so important and what it can do. I want to talk a little more transition into talking about what exactly resilience hubs are and some specific gaps that they fill. And so we see this increase in disasters, more communities experiencing more types of events. And one theme that we hear from many communities is that help from the outside often is very much later than the communities want, and it's often less than they want. And so these are two very recent examples. So in the $1 billion disaster, the wildfire event was in Hawaii. That's the Lahaina wildfires from last year. And there's a lot of, at least to us here in New York, very surprising pictures of help arriving on boats. At least to me, that's very surprising. A boat would have a hard time getting to me where I am. And basically, it took a long time for help to get in from the outside. And so a lot of community organizations that knew how to throw barbecues, they, were social groups. They really knew how to leverage getting food to each other, to their friends, to their communities. And these groups were some of the first groups to be able to actually help communities who had experienced that wildfire. And it's similar with the hurricanes that are going on or that happened this past fall, just weeks ago. And this is a story from the Washington Post about some veterans groups. So again, pre-existing community networks that were being leveraged to really help communities because they're already there and they already know the community. So this is what we think the future of emergency management, disaster resilience is, these really community-centered models. And so the Resilience Hub is one type of this model. And so we just want to share some definitions, some more definitions and concepts with you. So a Resilience Hub is a very specific thing. There are many definitions out there, and Rebecca and I like to use the one from the USDN, which is the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, who is one of the leading voices on developing these resilience hubs. And so they're a model that centers the community needs before, during, and after the disaster. And their definition says that they're community serving facilities augmented to support residents, coordinate communication, distribute resources, and reduce carbon pollution while enhancing quality of life. And I bolded some things that I think are really important because these really are about supporting residents and supporting the quality of life. It's not just thinking about the disaster, it's thinking about the before, during, and after. And so there's a couple of key points to what this means. So they really center community's decision-making, which is different than the historic traditional model of emergency management, where it's like very top-down and someone comes in and tells you what to do. These are very, the community is leading what it wants. They're co-developed, co-designed with the groups in the community. They're not focused, or usually they're not focused on a specific hazard. So they're multi-hazard, and they also have multiple benefits. Not just during the disaster, but before and after as well. One piece that I really like in this model is that you take an existing community space that the community already knows, they like to go. Often that's something that might have a name like a community center, but it can be other things. We'll talk about some examples in a second. And so again, that's different than the kind of top-down model where you just decide to like put some cots in a gym somewhere. And then the final thing that's really important is these have roles before, during, and after. And I know I keep saying that, but it's really, I think, different than the prior models of emergency management and disaster response. And so I just encourage you to think about how these are the same or different from those traditional models of shelters or cooling and warming centers that are typically thought about. And importantly, like these can also be shelters or cooling and warming centers, but the point is they're not just those things. They have many other roles. So we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like. And so this is a planning document from that USDN. And I love this one because it gives you kind of a template of thinking through what a resilience hub might look like in your community. And so hopefully some of these resources that we share, you all can take back to your communities and think through what a resilience hub might look like for you, and potentially even start making one there. So, USDN thinks about these 5 foundational areas, which are the rows in this column. So the first one is resilient services and programming. And these are typical things that a community center might do. So there's childcare, mental health and other health services, senior programming. Maybe there's a tool library. I see food pantries are a pretty common one in a lot of resilience hubs. Food seems to be important to a lot of people, and so that's a great community service and programming that's put on. And then oftentimes there's some sort of workforce development in it as well. The second kind of bucket is resilient communications. And this means both communications of the staff who are staffing the hub, as well as communications between the hub and the community that they serve. And so that can be things like walkie-talkies for staff to communicate. It can be Wi-Fi, again, not just during the event, but prior to the event. Maybe the center is a hub for people who don't have internet, don't have Wi-Fi at home or computer access. And so it can provide those. And then there can be other communications. The CERT team is a great community emergency response training. I think for some of the local folks, I believe there's one being offered in Dryden on the, I want to say Friday or Saturday, like tomorrow or the next day. It's coming up from the state of New York is providing that. It's a short 2-hour training, which I guess is shorter than the full CERT training. But I can pull that link if anyone is interested. So just drop it in the chat if you want that. We've seen in some resilience hubs, they have broadcasting studios and other communications devices that are not just to do the actual communications, but can serve as job training for members of the community. The third category is buildings and landscapes. And so these are, can be some of the things that people more think about. So this is your HVAC, so being able to serve as the cooling or warming space, kitchens for cooking, but then also thinking about flooding resilience on the outside. So, bioswales or flood barriers can be gardens to enhance food security. It can be trees to reduce the urban heat island effect. So then the fourth one is power. And again, this is one that this is where many people's minds first go with resilience hubs. And so this is an important piece, but we encourage it to only be a piece and to think about more of it. So this is energy resilience during blackouts, which you don't even need it to be other things going on. Many communities experience power outages even during blue sky conditions due to aging infrastructure. And so this resilient power can actually be really important in a lot of communities. So that can be a lot of resilience hubs have combo solar panels on the roof with backup batteries. And the time span that many plan for is about 72 hours of energy needs are how they scope those. And then the final one is resilient operations and maintenance. And so this is things like building accessibility so that everyone can actually enter this facility and use it. Security can be an important part of this, as well as just making sure that the staff are appropriately supported and have all the training and space to do what they need to do. So again, these 5 categories should each be considered kind of an invitation to consider for a resilience hub. Shouldn't be considered a checklist for everything that is supposed to be in one. So I'm just going to flip through some examples of what these actually look like. And so again, these are great resources from the USDN, and they've kind of sketched out a couple different building types. So here for a community center, one could consider there being solar panels or some kind of generator. We've got accessibility ramps so everyone can access, trees for heat mitigation, considerations about different ways, different transportation methods that someone might access the space. And then inside, they've got different spaces that can be used for all sorts of different community programming. And I don't know, there's so much written here, I'm not going to go into it, but I highly recommend these USDN documents. And happy to chat more in depth if anyone is interested. So this is a community center kind of model, which is, I think we see many resilience hubs seem to be being established in community centers. This is a fairly common one. A library or some other sort of municipal controlled building is, I think, something else that we kind of see a lot of. So again, we can look at trees to reduce the heat, solar panels. This one, they're talking about rainwater capture, community gardening, accessible entrances, again, shared food spaces. Food really is a theme that comes up a lot. Turns out we all like to eat, I guess. And again, many other components, Wi-Fi access, and these spaces that are flexible for many different programming also seems to be a pretty common component. Now we're getting into some of the more creative ones or that are less common. And so many types of space can be turned into a resilience hub. Again, to me at least, the core piece is that it's a place the community already knows, they already trust, and we're just enhancing it to provide additional resilience to that community. And so this example is an urban row home or building. So this can be a densely populated area. And we've got solar panels, some green spaces for gardening, gathering. Here they're talking about tool sharing, security checkpoints, and accessible entrances. And you'll see energy is a theme through a lot of these. Faith-based locations are also common. Many faith organizations, these kind of services are right in line with their mission of serving their communities. And so again, we can consider greening for cooling and also for food, rainwater, and a lot of different types of spaces that could be used. So here we're talking about showering facilities, food storage and distribution. These are all things that can be important during a disaster, but are also important during non-disaster times. And the final one, I think this is less relevant to our community, but just shows how very specific communities with very specific needs can tailor this whole model to their needs. So this is from the Hawaiian Islands. I don't actually know a lot about this specific hub that they're referencing, but again, it's just an example of a community adopting this model. And so in case you're interested in learning a little more, there are some specific ones that have had a lot written about them, and I would just like to quickly highlight them because they kind of are the guiding stars for many of us. So Boyle Heights Arts Conservatory in East Los Angeles is well known, and it's really interesting because this is actually kind of like an art gallery and art space. And again, it came from a place of, well, where's the community already going? What does the community like to do? And so this art space served as a community connector in East LA there, near where I used to live. I love LA. And then we've got some community centers. So one in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and one in Washington, D.C. These are, again, community centers that had many multi-purpose spaces in there, and kind of is the more traditional model of resilience hubs, but those are great examples. And then this is an example from a tribal nation out in California. The Blue Lake Rancheria it's a whole resilience campus. They are leaders on doing a lot of really awesome stuff out there. And a lot of people have learned from their experiences. So these are 3 great ones to check out. I think the last thing that we wanted to do with y'all, if there's time, I guess Rebecca and I are both used to running these kind of things as engaged community activities, and that's really hard to do on Zoom. So sorry, we tried to condense this into a slideshow, but we wanted to maybe try an activity here, or I don't know how we're doing on time, Don, if you want us to jump to any questions.
I think if you've got an activity, go for it.
And oh, awesome. And then I guess the other thing before we get to questions, I also want to shout out, didn't want to embarrass them too much on the call, but our wonderful hosts, PRI, are actually one of our wonderful collaborators on exploring what resilience hubs mean here in New York. And we can invite them to say a little more about what their experience is if they're up for it. But did just want to highlight that this talk is not just I don't know, a random talk. We've really enjoyed working with PRI and have been learning from them and are grateful for everything that they do. So, all right, so do we want to quickly do the exercise or hand it over to PRI to say anything that their learnings that they have?
Hand it to Ingrid because she's really coordinated our efforts on the Resilience Hub. So I'm going to put her on the spot.
Yeah, I could say a few words. So I'm the Climate Change Education Manager at PRI, and we are in the process of working to become a resilience hub for our local community. And we're still kind of working out what that means, but one example would be, for instance, we have the Museum of the Earth, our Natural History Museum. It's a large building that can hold a lot of people, and we have air conditioning. So maybe it could be a space that people could come to stay safe during an extreme heat event. And the other thing is, we already do community service in several forms. So for instance, we are a polling place during elections. But I would say much more broadly, we provide education for our community, and that's local, but also to a national scale. So we provide science education on evolution, on biodiversity, and a lot on climate change. So this is something, and we're already doing climate change resilience education, but we could certainly do more and more targeted to our local community to help people here in Ithaca, learn about what they need to do to become more resilient to the type of extreme weather that we're facing more and more. So it seems natural, I think, for us to become a resilience hub in that sense, to expand and broaden our idea of community service and education, and then think about in really practical ways that we can serve our community. So stay tuned, we're working on it, and we'll have more to talk about in the next year.
I think if you want to try that activity, I would say go ahead and give it a try.
Sure. Yeah, and I want to also reiterate from it's PRI has been really wonderful to work with and given us some it's really empowering a lot of in the community and all you do. So we had this idea that if you'd all like to participate, it's called a 10-10-10, where you can think about just in your own community, and that community could be your block, it could be your household, it could be your town, it could be your region. But what can you do in 10 minutes, 10 weeks, and 10 months to build resilience within your community? And so if you want to use the chat, you can, kind of like Alistair said, we like to work and engage conversations where we have lots of time and like to over prepare a little. And so ideally we take about half an hour and break into breakout rooms and spend some time collaborating. But why don't, in the interest of time and thought, why don't we use the chat, and you can just put in the chat 10 minutes, 10 weeks, or 10 months, and just throw some ideas out there. And then the bigger thing to do is to keep this in the back of your mind. So if you're out there walking your dog, I have a dog, so I think a lot when I walk him, but or washing dishes or just out doing anything, you can think about this 10-10-10 of what you can do in 10 minutes, 10 weeks, and 10 months. So like Alistair just put in the chat, 10 minutes, go knock on a neighbor's door and see, and just ask them if they have someone to call if there is an extreme heat event, or if there's a snowstorm and you know a neighbor, and just know that people change, where life changes and changes people around them. So what can you do in 10 minutes, 10 weeks, and 10 months? Maybe in 10 minutes you go and clear out your drains around your home, and then take a minute to go walk over to a neighbor who may not have the best mobility and offer to do theirs as well. Sorry, I don't know how to make it stop. I'm gonna mute myself for a second.
We don't hear whatever it is.
Sorry about that. It just was a bulk call. Sorry about that. So, but you can think about what you can do. Life happens. In 10 minutes, 10 months, Jen Myers, thank you for putting in 10 months. You could facilitate a community resilience assessment. Absolutely. What a great idea. That means that maybe you go to some meetings and can meet once a month. Ingrid shared that in 10 minutes, you could share info on your neighborhood listserv about emergency preparedness workshops in your community. And thank you for doing that last week, Ingrid. That's awesome. In 10 weeks, you can make a neighborhood phone tree and make sure that Alistair put that on there. And then maybe that means that you walk around your block and make sure that even though there's somebody who's a neighbor who you may not be necessarily friends with or know, you can make sure that they have someone to call and are connected with. Another thing that could come up is all sorts of different things that you could do. Arlene shares that I'm a registered nurse, thinking in 10 minutes, I would check on my neighbors and see what they may need that might help as far as do they have enough of their medications and a way to get to the hospital? Absolutely, Arlene, what a great idea. And thank you for being, I have a whole lot of respect for registered nurses. So thank you for being an RN. That's incredibly important. But there are so many things that we can do. But when we think about 10 minutes, that's, instead of playing Wordle, I love Wordle, but instead of playing Wordle, you can finish Wordle, and instead of picking up the next game, just go out and maybe knock on a door and have a conversation with somebody and do commit to do that once a month. 10 weeks means that that's 2.5 months and that's a season. When we think about 10 weeks, that's the fall or the spring or different things. Don shares in 10 weeks, you can make an effort to get to know your neighbors so that you might know who is likely to need help, as well as those who are able to offer help. Don, that's such a great idea. And also knowing that your neighbors change because their circumstances change, where you may have a neighbor that is very flexible, but then has a child who then changes their malleability or flexibility, or people go through different health situations. So you can check in with them and make sure, and know that I would say that reaching out to your neighbors and getting to know what access they have to things. And in 10 months is almost a year. So you're going through multiple seasons and multiple changes and shifts. Rob Ross shares design evaluation plans and go bags, absolutely, for resilience and family personal networks. And I will, not that I'm trying to sell anything, but I love Life Straws. Those are one of my favorite things out there. And what Life Straws are is a personal water filter that you can get, and that is a great object to go into go bags. And so what that gives everybody in your household, if everybody has a Life Straw, is an immediate water filter if there's a problem. In 10 weeks, Becky shares, and I'm sorry if I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. You can plant a lot of trees. Absolutely. What a wonderful thing to do. And trees are wonderful for absorbing carbon dioxide, but they're also excellent at flood mitigation and directing where floodwaters can go and absorbing groundwater in the ground. So there's so many reasons you could do that. Ingrid shares in 10 weeks, you can build up a store of non-perishable food in your home. Absolutely. And make sure that if there is some sort of event, you're self-sufficient and can feed yourself and get access to water. So there's just so many different things you can do. And you can take this 10-10-10 activity anywhere you go. I have 3 kids, and I'll say that when I ask them this, they come up with amazing ideas and are part of the collaboration that we can do to make our own household more resilient. Arlene shares wondering about our homeless. Absolutely. And it's a very important question to ask. So vulnerable, used to seeing homeless patients with frostbite every winter. And I'm sure that is hard to see. It's a big strain on our healthcare system and may tend to think about, but in 10 months, is there a way that we can make sure to get shelter in place before extreme cold and snowstorms? Absolutely. And if we're seeing frostbite, if that's, I think that's so important. Maybe it's a matter of making sure that there's adequate outdoor wear even. And thinking like maybe what we need to do is if Arlene is, I think you're RN, if I remember correctly. If that's what you're seeing and you're seeing regular frostbite, then maybe making warming centers and having places where people can go to warm up, and having adequate socks and dry footwear to do that. Becky shares, I'm transforming my backyard from grass to a medicinal herb garden. Amazing. With trees, shrubs, and over 150 species. Wow. It took me 10 years, but it absorbs a lot of rain during big rain events. Absolutely. That is a wonderful thing to be investing in. And so, if that's taken you 10 years, maybe in 10 minutes or 10 weeks, you may know a neighbor who you can drop off some seeds to and get that even started somewhere else. Although that's awesome to have that backyard from grass to a medicinal herb garden. That's really cool. But here's so many different ideas that we can think about, and what we're trying to do with resilience hubs, just like Becky, you shared, and Arlene, you shared, and Rob, and Don and Ingrid shared. I'm so glad you're happy to share plans. Those are the best when you share plans, because brings lots of love and stuff. But if you can think about what resilience hubs are all those things that you're doing for yourself and building resilience in and of itself. And so that's what we're trying to do with resilience hubs, is meet with community organizations like PRI and some other community partners and help all those different entities build what it is for themselves, and invest in resilience and what that means to reduce vulnerability and adaptive capacity, which is the ability to respond to all these things that we are unaware of and don't know that are coming because our climates are shifting. And if we plan and do that in advance, that puts us in a much better position to have a more resilient future, or at least that's what I hope. And let's see, with that, Alistair, would you have anything else to share?
Just thanks to everyone.
Yeah,
Thanks
yeah,
for
absolutely.
coming. Yeah, you can.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, just thanks to everyone for coming, and I guess we'll stick around for questions. But and thanks to Rebecca for all the great partnership on all of this work, and to PRI also for the partnership on this and the invitation to come talk to everyone here.
Yeah.
Thank you. And let's
Thank
open
you.
up for questions.
I guess I just more of a thought than a question, but when there was talk about the cost, the billions of dollars with all the natural, the disasters, I actually went to healthcare, because when I mentioned about frostbite every winter, I'm talking, oh my gosh, like we would get 3-4 homeless patients with frostbite. I worked in a trauma center in Strong Memorial Hospital, and we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, like amputations, toes, a leg. Some guy lost part of his face. I mean, it was really, really bad. It was really severe. So I was wondering if there were many studies on the cost of healthcare and natural disasters. You know, it was just a small piece of it, but I was wondering, you know, if it just kind of interested me, because I didn't really think about it until now, actually. You know, I'm like, wow, natural disasters, healthcare, the cost, holy cow, you know. It was really sad. I don't think we went a winter without frostbite, at least one homeless patient or 2 or 3 or more. It was really sad.
That's hard. I think Alistair would be the best one to take this one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
so
just curious. I mean, if not much has been done on studies, it's just kind of hit me, and I went, huh, I never thought of it like that
well,
before.
thank you so much for, first of all, your work, but then also this question here. And you might be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't, to know that those billions of dollars do not include the healthcare costs. So they do not include either the loss of the quality of life of that person who is having their fingers amputated. Like
Well, this
that
was
is,
homeless. Like these are like people with no health insurance, no nothing, and we didn't turn anybody away, you know?
yeah. So
So I never
those,
thought about like,
you're right on, because and this is something that I'm trying to figure out how we can incorporate into these numbers and better understand. So it's neither the cost to the patients and people who are experiencing these negative health outcomes that do include death, even like cold, especially extreme cold and extreme heat, are things that cause a lot of these medical conditions without causing a lot of property damage. And so like a hurricane hits the news because you can take a nice picture of a house blown down, and nice is the wrong word. You can take an impactful picture and everyone understands how bad it is, but it's really hard to take a picture of how bad an extreme cold or extreme heat event is. And so I think in part because of that, there's other reasons these types of disasters have actually been undercounted. And so again, they don't include the cost to the people, and they don't include the cost on the burden on the medical system. They don't include the amount of time that you and your colleagues had to spend treating all these people, taking away from other medical procedures that could have been done.
right, because I'm thinking we were one hospital in one city. Can you imagine every city, every disaster, every healthcare?
Yeah.
You know, no one, I mean, who turns people away? I don't think hospitals
And-
do. I don't know. I was just
and-
thinking about the strain on the healthcare system must be like gigantic, you know? So I don't know. It just kind of hit me.
Yeah, thank you. And I
Never
see
thought about
Jen
it.
added mental health care as well. And so again, that's another
Oh,
thing
sure. With
that
COVID, holy
is
cow. That was a
that's
big
also
one.
there.
Hmm.
And yeah, and so we are people are trying to quantify this, because a lot of the way that various governments make decisions is through very economic decisions about, we have a budget, it's this large, and we want to spend it in the way that has the most impact. And so a lot of the metrics they use are numerical and dollar based. And so there are many people who care about this topic who are working to understand the numbers to then feed it into these systems. And we could have a discussion about whether that's the best way to be making decisions. But people are working to try and work on all this. So yeah, great thoughts. And
I just kind of
hopefully
thought
there's more
more than
progress
anything. I know
sometime.
there's not just like it's a random thought. I was like, All right. Well, thank you. All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and then on the quantifying the talk from I've forgotten his name, which is from the $1 billion disasters.
Adam Smith.
Adam Smith.
Adam
Yeah.
Smith. Yeah, his talk was really interesting, and there's a link to the recording up further in the chat, as well as on the Science in the Virtual Pub events page. So. And there have been more $1 billion disasters, a lot more since he gave that talk in 2022.
So I've got a very general question for either Rebecca or Alistair. Of course, countries all around the world are experiencing these climate change related hazards and disasters. Are there any other countries that have a more, are ahead of us on this, or at least have a kind of a nationally organized system for dealing with resilience?
Yeah, I mean, every country is really different right now, and it's a really hard it's a hard thing to say in a general sense. I'll say. So, I know, like, I have partnerships with a few different countries, and the challenges that they face within the country are different than the challenges that we're facing in the United States. And one of the things that is universal is that climate systems are shifting. And so places that, like, it's really hard because, in the hour that we have together, we looked at heat. But if we looked at drought, what we could show you is that that literally biomes are shifting, and we're seeing more desertification. So like there's more increases in deserts because of drought, and then there's shifting happening. And so that makes different things move. So for example, I have a partnership with Sierra Leone, and what we saw was there was massive drought, and so farmers moved into Freetown, where there's now overpopulation. And then when flooding results there, we're going to anticipate that there's going to be that flooding is exacerbated where water and people are. And so if there is a storm surge event, then there's massive, that challenge is going to be faced tremendously. And then you have some, other countries that really have lower population and high GDP, and they can manipulate their environment preemptively because they can make investments in essentially resilience hubs from a broader system. So there's some really exciting infrastructure being built that can redirect floodwater beautifully. But you have to have the financial capacity and flexibility to make those investments. And so it's just very different for every country as far as what different places can do. But what we're seeing universally is that we can't look in the past to predict the weather and climate systems of the future. And that's a really, really big challenge. And so it's hard, and we keep seeing over and over again, but this place has never flooded before, and now it's flooding, and we had this temperature before, and we never did that. And so a lot of that adaptive capacity can be linked to all sorts of things, from the ability to, if you have enough money to make those investments really, really quickly, then maybe you can have different levels of adaptive capacity. You could have great political will and people who are involved, and you can get people to move around very quickly. And so it's not just a matter of so there is this connection between the social and the ecological system that really feeds into resilience. And how resilient a place can be is not just ecological, and it's not just social, and it's not just economic, but all of those factors coming together. And so it's a really hard thing to predict. But what needs to happen universally is that I believe with all my heart is to invest in resilience from the local level up, which is what we're doing with resilience hubs. Like, I don't think there's a more important thing we can do than empower places like PRI and other community partners to be able to make the investments so people can get to know their community, understand what their capacity is, and then start to make those changes in that 10-10-10, like 10 weeks, 10 minutes, and 10 months, and be investing in the social capacity and the adaptive capacity of communities to build resilience. I don't know if that answers your question at all, but that's what my heart, that's why I really feel so passionate about these resilient hubs and the work that Alistair, that I'm so privileged to be working with Alistair on, because we make a really good team, and with our community partners like PRI. Ingrid, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I had a question. So in the last few weeks, we've been hearing on the news a lot about these fires in the Northeast, wildfires, brush fires, and it really hit home with that brush fire that happened in Lansing, like right just north of Ithaca. And so I'm curious, what can you tell us a little bit about what communities need to do, before, during, and after to be ready for fires specifically?
So fires, that's a good question, because both Alistair and I have a history studying fires in California, where you kind of expect to see them. And what happened here is we had this unusually warm, dry fall, and it was actually only a mile and a half from my house where we are, and it was pretty scary. Now, I'll say two things. One is that one of the reasons we were able to contain that so quickly is because it was located close to the lake, and we had the malleability of having all fire departments being able to show up, right? However, if we're seeing an increase in different disasters, we're going to stop being able to send fire departments. Like we just sent from this region, we just sent, I think, to New Jersey a couple of of our firefighting crew. And we saw this with snow events in Buffalo a couple of years ago when their storm system like slowed down and sat over Buffalo, and they needed to be plowed out. And all these different highway departments sent over resources from that to go and bail out. And unfortunately, what we predict in our future is that we're going to have an increase in the number of disasters, an increase in the intensity, and the increase in frequency. And so we're got to start working together to not rely on the fact of saying, well, our real backup is to have out of area emergency responders, but invest within. And part of that is investing in resilience hubs. We've been predicting for a long time that we'd have an increase in wildfires, and we could see them. They started out west. They've been moving over further and further east. And this goes along with an increase in drought, an increase in temperature. And that's where, you know, it's not that it was expected, but I'm definitely not surprised that we had that wildfire. Now, what I'd really like to see in building resilience is to look at this event and say, now what we need to do is get together and come up with a plan in place, because now we've had this taste that a wildfire can happen. What are we going to do the next time when it's not right on the lake? Right, that was right on the lake. We had like all the conditions for that. No homes were evacuated. It happened to be in an area that could be contained. Unfortunately, one firefighter was injured, but I understand that they're okay. My heart goes to them. But what we need to do is remember that cycle that we showed you, is go back and say, okay, well, how are we going to work together collaboratively to make those investments to build resilience so we can be more adaptive in the future, because another wildfire is going to happen. And so as long as we're having those collaborative, open conversations, I think that's what we need to be doing. Alistair, do you want to take a stab at that as well?
Yeah, I'd love to add some. So up until 2 years ago, I worked for the state of California in their disaster agency on wildfire stuff. And so I think as this starts to be more of a concern in this part of the country, I think we definitely should look to our friends and colleagues out west who have a lot of experience and think about this all the time. But I really like a lot of like the topic of wildfire and the topic of community resilience, because that's the direction that a lot of this work is going. And so there's basically a set of actions now that have been well researched and generally are shown to greatly decrease the risk of homes and communities burning down. And they're collectively kind of called defensible space, which means you're kind of preparing the area around structures for keeping flammable materials away from structures, both vegetation, but also wooden fences. A lot of homes have been found to burn down because the fire just goes along the fence and then reaches the house that way. So that's outside the home. And then things that you can do to the home are called home hardening. And so they make homes more resilient to wildfires when they do come through. And then so that's on the individual level, but then the kind of community version of that is called community hardening. And that's basically because if your neighbor's house is burning down, that's a lot of flammable material right near you. And so if they're burning down, your house is at higher risk. And so in order to protect everyone's houses, we have to protect everyone's houses. And so community hardening is really the direction that a lot of West Coast communities are going. And so it's trying to figure out strategies to, protect every member of the community, because we're only as strong as the weakest link in our chain. And yeah, so it like fits right in with this community-centered resilience model. Yeah, and those are the words to look up: defensible space, community hardening, and home hardening.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? Well, thank you all so much. And again, we're off 2 weeks from tonight because it's Thanksgiving. And we'll be back, I believe it's December 12th, with Stephen Koob talking about the Blaschka glass invertebrates. And it was a great session. So thank you one and all.
Thank you so much for having us. It's been an honor to be here.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you. Have a great night, everybody.
you do.
You too.